as I said, my name is Amanda, and I'm a staff attorney at FreeState. This presentation is designed to be sort of a quick overview of some pretty broad topics. So I'm going to try to be condensing a lot of stuff, both looking at, potential changes that we can, maybe expect to see on the federal level over the next 4 years, as well as on the more hopeful end, things that we can do, state laws that we can rely on to sort of protect ourselves as much as possible in the face of those sort of potential changes. So I know that there's a whole lot of different fears and intersecting problems that folks are concerned about. I'm going to be sticking to 3 of the main concerns that we're hearing from the community and that I have enough knowledge of to present about. I will say that if anyone does have a really major concern that, they want to know more about, or a legal issue that they have questions about, please feel free to let us know. We're hoping to maybe do more of these presentations, or, either way, we're happy to answer your questions or direct you to where you can get your questions answered. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us on social media, through our intake form, in the chat, however you'd like. So back to this presentation, I'm going to be talking specifically about the potential for rollbacks on marriage equality, transgender rights, and anti-discrimination rights more generally. And then I'll follow that with different ways that we can try to protect ourselves in the event of those potential changes happening. So first off, if you're scared, you are valid. Those feelings are valid. I'm scared too. There's a lot of changes going on, state and federal, and it's still uncertain how a lot of these federal changes are going to be implemented. So again, my hope is that we can at least all sort of feel together in our uncertainty and hopefully learn something that will protect ourselves in whatever it is we might face. And I super encourage all of you to stay informed, which I'm sure all of you are here, so you're probably already planning to do that anyways. So first topic is marriage equality, meaning in this context, the legal right to marry. These up on the screen, I went too far. These on the screen are the 3 main sources federally for marriage equality, both in terms of same-sex marriage as well as interracial marriage. So very short history lesson. My presentation is here to my right, which is why I'm turning my head. So 1967, we have Loving v. Virginia, which is the Supreme Court case that prohibits anti-miscegenation laws, also known as, which are just laws that prohibit interracial marriage. So states are not allowed to have those laws since 1967. 2015, very similarly, the Supreme Court decides that any state law prohibiting gay marriage or same-gender marriage is prohibited. More recently, we have the Respect for Marriage Act, which was passed in 2022, which is sort of intended to be a safeguard in the event of, these 2 Supreme Court cases being overturned and things going back to, states deciding whether or not different types of marriage are legal. This law basically says that, if you're married in one state and that's a legal, valid marriage, even if you go into another state that doesn't recognize your marriage because of your gender or because of your race or your partner's gender or race, they still have to recognize that as a legally valid marriage. On the scary side of things, we do expect this to, potentially change, or at least definitely be, under attack on Supreme Court. The presidential administration, folks in Congress, are expressing interest in rolling back these rights. So thinking about what will happen in the event that these rights do get rolled back on the federal level, it's going to go back to being a state-by-state issue. So for those of you who remember pre-2015, when a lot of the fighting for gay marriage was done both federally and at the state level, some folks were focused on just going state by state to get them to legalize it. We were able to get a big overarching federal law, obviously, If that overarching federal law goes, it's back to state by state. Marriages that have already happened should still be valid. So if you're married now and you're worried about your marriage suddenly, being erased or being invalidated, don't worry about that. We also are pretty protected here in Maryland. There would definitely be concerns, though, about obviously other states passing laws that significantly hinder marriage equality rights. So that is, again, where that newer federal law comes into play, as it might protect, or hopefully will protect, the rights of a couple who is legally married in Maryland or one state, even if their marriage is not recognized in another state. So now that we're through the scary part, we can talk about a couple of things you can do to protect yourselves in the event of restrictions on marriage equality or attempts to sort of invalidate LGBTQ marriage. First off is adoption. So if you're in a same-gender partnership or marriage and you have a child, especially if that child is not biologically related to one of you and you're worried about losing parental rights, it might be worth looking into adoption. Second parent adoption is a particular type of adoption in Maryland and some other states that is specifically for same-gender couples who conceive their child through assisted reproductive technology. And it's nice because it's kind of expedited. You don't have to go to court, which is always nice. So it's a pretty quick process for folks who are in that situation who, even if both parents are on the birth certificate, you just want to have that extra layer of protection. Second parent adoption is something that I would recommend looking into. There's also step-parent or independent adoptions, which is sort of, for couples with where one of them or both are non-biologically related to the child. In other circumstances other than, assisted reproductive technology, that's the type of adoption you could pursue to, again, sort of safeguard those parental rights. Last point I'll make on adoption is that it can be a confusing process, a lot of paperwork and just getting different documents together. So if you want to know more, or if you're interested in pursuing an adoption, I definitely recommend contacting an attorney. And, that can be me or anyone else. I would definitely talk to an adoption attorney rather than trying to tackle that on your own, because that can be a little difficult to do without legal help. The other legal tools that I wanted to talk about regarding marriage and family rights is estate planning. So there are 3 different estate planning documents. We have the Advance Directive, also known as the Healthcare Power of Attorney document. This appoints an individual to basically make decisions on your behalf in regards to healthcare in the event that you are incapacitated. So if, say, there's an accident or for literally whatever reason, you are unable to make decisions about yourself that are in your best interests, or you're unable to communicate them in a way where other people can, understand them, this document is for appointing somebody to sort of take that place for you and make decisions that are actually in your best interests. This is a document that I always, and this is whether you're in a relationship, whether you have kids, if you're single and 20, I really recommend, especially trans folks, especially people in the community who do not want, say, parents or members of their family to be able to make decisions about their healthcare, get this document. It also has guidelines in addition to just sort of, it appoints somebody to make decisions, and then it has guidelines where you sort of set out your preferences in different circumstances. So I think the thing that people think of the most is sort of the pull the plug. Do I want to be kept on life support or not? But it's also like what pronouns you want your doctors to call you, or if you have preferences for certain physicians or medical facilities, or whether you want to be an organ donor. So it's a lot of really important decisions. So can't recommend enough to get this document done. Also, I will just add, I can't see the chat. So Joey, feel free to interject if I should stop for any reason. But moving on. The other one financial power of attorney. So this is similar to the advance directive in that it's appointing somebody to make decisions for you in the event that you're incapacitated. But this is more about financial decisions. So what to do with your property if you own a home, or what to do, with the money in your bank accounts. Again, very, very important, something that you want somebody who actually has your best interests at heart, somebody that you trust to be in control of if you're not able to control it yourself. So another document that I strongly recommend people get done, again, any age, any circumstances, it's important to have. So I'll just mention these two links, which I guess I don't want to try to pull them up, honestly. I don't want to mess up my share screen, but if you go to the Maryland Attorney General's website, they have forms that you can literally just print off and fill out, and that's your advance directive. Also, most legal aid orgs help folks with advance directives and other estate planning documents. So, whether you want to go have an attorney walk you through every step, or whether you'd rather stay at home and just fill something out yourself, Maryland tries to make it as easy as possible to get these documents done. So really strongly recommend looking into that if you have not already.
Hey, Amanda, we have two questions in chat that are kind of similar, going back to marriage.
Okay.
One person said, if you were married in Virginia, would any marriage laws in Maryland help us, or should we be married in Maryland? And another person asked that, but they were asking when they were married in South Carolina.
Those are really good questions. So, I would say, because I don't think that if you are already married, you can get double married in another state. So, off the top of my head, I wouldn't say that, if you're married in a state where you're concerned about laws changing, try to get married again. I will say 99% of the time when laws are passed that make these types of changes, they're not retroactive. So that means they can't go backwards. So I think I had a bullet up there in the marriage equality section saying sort of, if you're already married now, most of these changes, they're not going to retroactively invalidate your marriage. And while you're living in Maryland, even if South Carolina changes its law to not recognize, same-gender marriage, you'll still be in Maryland where they do. So I would say you're safe. Again, always I should have said this at the front, but take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I'm going based on, my understanding of the law as it has existed up to this time. A lot of us are prepared for things that we maybe have not seen before, but based on the knowledge that I have, I think, folks who are already married, I wouldn't worry about fully just, not being married anymore because of a law change. Hopefully that answers that question. Feel free to follow up if you have more follow-up questions. Lastly on here, the last will and testament, I think this is the one that most people are familiar with. This is for, upon your passing, what do you want to happen to your stuff? This is another way where you can sort of make sure that your spouse or partner will continue to be able to live in, your home if you pass, or, appointing somebody to be legal guardian of your child to make sure that, they stay in the same care of the right person when you pass, or, in the event that you pass and you have a minor child. So all of these are very important. Lots of free legal organizations help with them. So definitely look into that, reach out. Next slide. Okay. So I struggled a little with this section because to me, transgender rights is kind of I don't think there is an area of law that does not affect the rights of transgender people. But here I'm mostly going to be looking at two sort of really, big issues that we're hearing the most from folks, access to gender affirming care and legal documentation for trans folks. So currently, civil rights for trans folks are somewhat recognized at the federal level, and it's been increasing and going in a good direction for the most part. But we do unfortunately expect things to go in a different direction over the next 4 years. A lot of you probably saw, I have on the slide up here, the executive order passed last week. Had a bunch of bizarre, scary language in it about defining biological sex and somebody's sex being decided at conception, which I think is like not even scientifically possible. Could be wrong about that. But anyways, what I'll focus on is that, you know, we were expecting something like this to happen. We can definitely take this as a sign that our current administration is going to, you know, do what they can to follow through on promises that they've made during their campaign about restricting the rights of trans folks. And it's definitely something that, you know, we're concerned about and need to follow. And so also important to stay informed about. I'll also say, you know, and I'm happy to answer questions about executive orders if folks have them, like how effective they actually are. But in general, it's a really kind of like confusing area of the law because there's not a specific law that you could point to that says like this is what gives the president the power to do this. So there's also questions about like, well, what does it impact? It certainly can't immediately change the law. It can't, you know, immediately overturn a Supreme Court case decided 40 years ago. It can, though, influence, you know, policies and agencies and things like that. So I wouldn't completely write it off, but they wanted it to be a fear tactic. They wanted it to intimidate us. So I'm doing my best to not accept that and continue on anyways. So continuing on this slide of scary things that we can expect to see coming, we have also already seen conservative states taking steps to restrict civil rights and access to gender-affirming care for trans folks. There's a case in the Supreme Court I have on the slide here, U.S. v. Scrimeti, which is going to decide whether or not states can ban gender-affirming care for minors, specifically puberty blockers and hormones. So that's important to keep an eye on. Again, I'm not worried about that change affecting Maryland, but certainly more conservative states would be affected by this kind of case. And this is the thing I can probably say with the most certainty, I do not expect, and I think both the website to apply for a passport and for Social Security cards, they've already taken down instructions on how to update your gender marker on those documents. So I don't expect that folks will be able to update their federal identity documents over the next 4 years, but I'll get back to that more in a bit. In general, obviously, like I said, these changes are concerning, something that we will continue to monitor, something that FreeState and, you know, national organizations and advocacy groups are going to continue to fight at every step. So again, just make sure to stay informed as things progress. Okay, so now that we've talked about the scary part, we can move on a little bit to some hopefully more hopeful things. This slide isn't so much about a specific strategy or tool that you can use, but I did want to just give an overview on the protections that do exist at this time in Maryland for trans folks that will not be affected, asterisk, take that with a grain of salt, by federal law. So what that is to say is these are state laws that, you know, protect access to gender affirming care in different ways that I'll talk about that, again, based on, you know, current understanding of the rule of law, the federal government would not have the overreach to completely eradicate. They can change things on the federal level, but if Maryland wants to create these rights, they have the right to create these rights. That makes sense. So, you know, first looking at shield laws, these protect providers who provide gender affirming care to folks who are coming in from states where it's banned, as well as those folks who are, you know, going into Maryland to get care. Basically, Maryland is saying, you know, we're not going to rat you out to the state so that they can arrest you or do whatever it is that they want to do. If folks have heard of Maryland being a sanctuary state, that's what that is referring to. It also applies to folks who come to Maryland for an abortion.
Amanda,
Second, oh, go ahead.
we have some questions in chat. What's up?
Okay.
I'll throw each of them at you. I'll let you answer, and I'll go to the next one. Not to overwhelm you. If I already have a gender X passport, will it stay valid?
That is a really good question. So, again, changes, if you already have something, they're likely not to be effective. Changes, most of the changes that we're going to be seeing are like starting when that law changes going forward. I would keep an eye on things. We're definitely, it's honestly, a lot of it is kind of, we're waiting to see how a lot of these things are going to be responded to. But I would not be concerned about, going to the airport tomorrow and trying to show your passport and them being like, or TSA just like throwing it in the trash or just saying this isn't valid because there's an X on it. There would have to be more done at the federal level for that to happen. So sorry, can't give you a totally clear answer. Something to keep an eye on, and feel free to reach out to FreeState or other orgs again as things change, and we can sort of keep you updated on that.
Yes, and I'll remind you that what we can't give like an exact answer on right now, I'm writing down. We'll take it back to our team after this. Second question. Based on your understanding of current law, can they retroactively undo changes to vital records that have already been made?
Yes, so vital records, I'm assuming you're thinking about birth certificates. So I'll say first again, retroactive, we don't expect to see retroactive changes. Asterisk. They can certainly try. The executive order was wild and had a lot of wild language in it. So I would not be shocked if wild things continued to be released by this administration. But in general, in the law, things are not applied retroactively. And that would be a very big change for them to start having that happen. Other part of the question, because it's a birth certificate, so vital records are controlled by the state. So in Maryland, if you have a Maryland birth certificate, that's Maryland law. That's not federal law. Again, Maryland is unlikely to change, and I'll get into this a little bit on the next slide, actually. But Maryland, we don't expect any changes in terms of updating gender markers or your legal name on Maryland issued documents and other state issued documents in non-conservative states.
I have a few more to throw at you, which if you're okay with that, I think that, again, I know we said town hall could come at the end of it, but if everyone's okay with it, I think we can ask these throughout. Yeah. What happens if federal documents and state documents are not in sync about a person's gender?
Yes. So that's a really good question. I honestly, maybe I'll just go to this next slide. In terms of documents not lining up, it's a source of concern. So one thing that we're telling folks, if you have not applied for a passport before, and you're in the process of getting your name changed and your gender marker designation, or you've already done that, and say you have your corrected birth certificate or you're about to correct your birth certificate, that's the document that you use to apply for a passport. So if you haven't had a passport before, our expectation is that you should be able to apply to the passport with your corrected, updated birth certificate. You don't have to tell them it's changed. You just say, hey, here's my birth certificate for the passport application. And that's the information they'll use on the passport. Otherwise, we recommend folks just doing what they can to try to use their state issued documents as much as they can for things. Sometimes there's no workaround for that. Sometimes you have to have a federal document in there. But sometimes when there is wiggle room, say driver's license and birth certificate, those, again, assuming you were born in Maryland, those are both Maryland documents. Those would still be free to, be changed and updated. And if you use both of those, then they'll say the same thing. I'll be honest, a lot of folks are concerned about documents, not all saying the same thing. And some folks are considering, sadly, like by all intents and purposes, legally going back into the closet, having their documents reflect whatever gender they were assigned at birth, if they haven't changed it, or whatever it is, so that they don't have to worry about documents saying different things. That's not something I would feel comfortable telling someone to do. I think that's ultimately a very, very personal choice. But it is something that some people are considering. So I think, it ultimately comes down to, again, how we see things progress, and also just what your priorities are, what your comfortability is, what you feel will best sort of ease your fears and anxieties, I think is the direction I think you should go in. Sorry, I went a little bit on a tangent there.
Totally okay. Next question. Which this seems, you tell me, Amanda, this is for you or me, or if we should bring it back to the resource team. Are there ways to protect trans folks affected by housing agencies and partners feeling emboldened to deny subsidized housing on the basis of sex or gender?
Yes, so that's also a really great question. I'm just gonna hop around to my different slides. So this is sort of connected to anti-discrimination law, which is, you raised a great example. If somebody is applying for housing, or even if they're just, applying to rent, an apartment, and the employer somehow clocks that they're trans, and the landlord somehow clocks that they're trans, or employer if they're applying for a job, in Maryland, that's still going to be illegal discrimination. Maryland's going to keep those laws on the books. We actually just passed a law last year where every single one of our anti-discrimination laws, so housing, employment, healthcare, education, banks, whatever you can think of, all of the anti-discrimination laws, which, historically have also applied to, race and, nationality, religion, those things that folks are more familiar with. It also always includes sexual orientation, sex, and gender identity. So again, in Maryland, those protections will still be there. And what we're telling folks to do is just, instead of going to a federal agency to sort of file a claim of discrimination, which is, the typical process when you are discriminated against, whatever institution it is, you file with the appropriate agency, they investigate it, try to mediate a solution, or, somehow find justice for the person who's discriminated against. And then if that all falls through, then you sort of get to the lawsuit portion. So all that is to say, we have federal agencies that do that, as well as state agencies and even local agencies, like Montgomery County has, I think it's either the Human Rights Office or the Human Rights Commission. Baltimore City has one, most local governments in Maryland have them. Those will all still continue to investigate, discrimination against trans people, discrimination against LGBTQ people. So, if discrimination happens, if you know somebody who's discriminated against, our biggest recommendation is just going to the state agency, which I have here, Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. Again, you can reach out to them and, do an interview, file a claim, and they will be relying on state law to sort of determine whether or not discrimination occurred.
Amazing. There's one more question, and I think I'm going forward because I really want Amanda to finish his presentation. Again, everyone's gonna get a recording in a few days, but I want to make sure y'all can hear them go through it and explain it. Last question, and the rest of the questions, please send them in, but we'll handle them at the end of the presentation. If your job is in Maryland, but you live in another state, can you still file a complaint through the MCCR? Now, I asked you that question, Amanda, but Tyler Cochran, who is an attorney at the Maryland office of the Attorney General Civil Rights Division, just messaged and said, "We are partners with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights and are authorized to bring cases on behalf of Marylanders who experience civil rights violations, including housing discrimination on the basis of LGBTQ plus identity." That's in the chat. But Amanda, to your knowledge, going back to if your job is an MD but you live in another state, can you still file?
Yeah, so my understanding is it's if you're talking about employment discrimination, it's where the employer is located. So if the job is in Maryland, you would file in Maryland.
Okay, amazing. Gonna go back on mute. You got this.
Okay. um, so let me go back to the, I can't remember if I went through all of this. I was going over existing protections in terms of transgender folks having access to gender affirming care. I definitely talked about the sanctuary state. Talked a little bit already from that question just now about discrimination. Again, insurers, healthcare providers cannot discriminate against LGBTQ people. And lastly, the Trans Health Equity Act, which was passed recently in the state, requires Medicaid, which is the state health insurance, to cover gender affirming care. The reason it's only Medicaid is just because, Maryland has pretty much complete control over that program, whereas they don't have that level of control over private insurance companies that could be, their headquarters could be like in Texas or something. It's sort of a different regulatory game. But, in my opinion, this slide is too sparse. I think, FreeState is still working, and, so many other advocacy organizations, Trans Maryland, we're all working to expand on these protections, especially, with the next 4 years coming up. So I think I kind of went over everything I wanted to talk about in terms of name changes and gender markers. Again, main point, in the state of Maryland, things are going to stay the same. You'll still be able to get your name changed. You'll still be able to get a legal gender declaration. You'll still be able to update your Maryland documents. It's just we do not expect that possibility to continue, at least over the next 4 years at the federal level. And I know a lot of people probably have individual questions of like, I'm from this state, I have my driver's license in Maryland, where should I file or what can I do? Again, feel free to reach out to us. Any questions that we don't have time to get to in this, we are happy to, follow up with you about in the future. Okay, so a little bit more scary things. Again, I started talking a little bit about discrimination and anti-discrimination laws. So as you all probably seen, the Trump administration has already started working on, getting rid of DEI programs, pushing states to get rid of their DEI programs. Obviously this is bad news for our community and, every marginalized person. So, again, very concerning, something that we're going to continue to monitor, something that, I strongly recommend you stay updated on yourself. I also, the other point on here about the executive order, Bostock, for those of you who don't know, was a Supreme Court decision that decided, a lot of folks argue about how broad or narrow it is, but in general, it establishes, anti-discrimination rights for trans folks at the federal level. So they're trying to narrow that as much as possible. And then I did touch on this slide already. Again, while things may change on the federal level, we don't expect changes to happen in Maryland. If anything, our goal is to expand on protections in Maryland. So, you still have avenues to fight against discrimination in Maryland, either through the MCCR or through different local government agencies that are also, often really, really great. And I think that's actually it. So I have, if anyone wants to screenshot this or take a picture, this is a list of resources, certainly not exhaustive, that are, focused on LGBTQ rights. So, follow them for updates, advice, resources, community. All of these are great. And if somebody wants me to go back a slide, just put it in the chat, but I'll leave it on this slide. These are our two business cards. So feel free to scan the QR code. Here's our contact information. Any further questions, please feel free to reach out.